Let me tell you something you don't know about Nova. He wasn't chosen because he was a hero. He wasn't chosen because he was brave or strong or even particularly special. Richard Ryder was a teenager from Long Island who was literally the only person in range of a dying alien's last-second gamble. In the world of cosmic law enforcement, Nova's origin isn't a story of destiny. It's a story of a cosmic accident that left a kid holding the keys to a nuclear arsenal. Most people look at the gold helmet and see a Marvel version of Green Lantern. But the truth is much darker, much more violent, and carries a weight that would crush most grown men. To understand the human rocket, we have to look at the blood and ash that paved the way for his first flight. It starts with a scream across the vacuum of space. The planet Xandar was once the crown jewel of the Andromeda galaxy. It was the home of the Nova Corps, a peacekeeping force that maintained order across thousands of systems. But order is a fragile thing when faced with pure, unadulterated genocide. Enter Zor the Conqueror. Zor didn't just want to defeat Xandar, he wanted to erase it from the map of existence. In a matter of hours, a civilization that had stood for millennia was reduced to floating debris. The Nova Corps was slaughtered to a man, leaving only one survivor. Roman Day. Day was the Centurion Prime, the highest-ranking officer of the Corps, and he was dying. His ship was a wreck, his body was broken, and his enemies, Zor, was already heading toward the next target. Earth. Day knew he couldn't stop Zorar alone. He didn't have the strength to fight, but he had the Nova Force, the collective energy of an entire civilization. He needed a vessel. He needed someone to carry the fire before it went out forever. He scanned the planet below, searching for a mind that could handle the sudden influx of cosmic power. He didn't find a soldier. He didn't find a scientist. He found Richard Ryder, a kid sitting in a diner in Hempstead, New York, wondering why his life was so incredibly boring. Imagine sitting at a table, complaining about math homework, when a beam of invisible energy hits you like a freight train. That's how Richard Ryder's life as a superhero began. He didn't get a costume and a pep talk. He got a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Richard collapsed instantly, his brain reeling from the sudden download of alien technology and raw power. While his friends panicked, Richard was experiencing a telepathic source from a dying man millions of miles away. Roman Day's voice echoed in his mind, explaining the impossible. The Nova Corps was dead, the power was now his, and the monster that killed Xandar was coming for him next. When Richard woke up in the hospital, he thought it was a fever dream, until he felt the tingling in his skin, until he realized he could hear the static of the universe humming in his ears. He stepped out of his hospital bed and realized he wasn't just stronger, he was a living battery. He went back to the spot where he collapsed, and there it was, the helmet. It didn't look like a toe, it looked like a piece of high-tech weaponry. The moment he put it on, the transition was complete. The suit materialized around him, a uniform made of star stuff and alien alloys. He wasn't Richard Ryder anymore. He was the last Centurion, but there was no time for a montage or a training session. Zor had arrived on Earth. The creature that had just liquidated a planet was now standing in a New York suburb. He was looking for the last trace of the Nova Corps. He was looking for Richard. This is where the story shifts from a typical origin into something more visceral. Richard didn't know how to fly. He just fell upward at supersonic speeds. He didn't know how to fight. He just swung his fists with the force of a collapsing star. The battle between Richard and Zor wasn't a choreographed superhero fight. It was a desperate, panicked struggle for survival. Richard was a teenager fighting a genocidal warlord. Every time he hit Zor, he felt the Nova Force threatening to tear his own molecules apart. That's the secret about Nova's power that most people miss. The Nova Force isn't just energy. It's a sentient, overwhelming pressure that requires constant mental discipline to control. If Richard loses focus for even a second, he doesn't just lose the fight, he vaporizes everything within a 5-mile radius. During the fight, the voice of Roman Day returned one last time. Day used the last of his ship's power to lock onto Zor's energy signature. He told Richard to hold the monster in place. It was a suicide mission. Day fired a beam of pure antimatter from his dying ship, aiming right at the spot where Richard and Zor were locked in combat. In an instant, Zor was disintegrated. Richard was shielded by the Nova Force, but the trauma was absolute. He watched a man he never met sacrifice himself to save a world Richard barely understood. When the smoke cleared, the threat was gone. But Richard was left with a burden he never asked for. He was a high school student with the power to level a city. He had the memories of a dead civilization flickering in the back of his mind, and he was the only thing standing between Earth and the horrors of the deep cosmos. But here is the part that really haunts the Nova legacy. Richard Rider didn't just inherit a suit, he inherited a debt. The Nova Force is the lifeblood of Xandar. By carrying it, Richard became the living record of every soul lost on that planet. He began to realize that the helmet wasn't a gift. It was a tombstone he had to wear every single day. He tried to go back to his normal life. He tried to go to school and hang out with his friends. But how do you talk about a prom date when you've seen the end of a galaxy? How do you worry about a failing grade when you can hear the screams of dying stars? Richard became a man divided. On Earth, he was a hero, a member of the New Warriors, a defender of the weak. But in the eyes of the universe, he was a scavenger. He was a human holding on to a power that didn't belong to his species. This tension is what makes Richard Rider the most compelling cosmic hero in the Marvel Universe. He isn't a god like Thor. He isn't a billionaire like Tony Stark. He's a blue-collar kid from Long Island trying to do a job that is fundamentally impossible. He eventually found his way back to the stars, rebuilding the Nova Corps from nothing. He became the hero who stood alone against the annihilation wave. He became the man who looked Thanos in the eye and didn't blink. But it all goes back to that one night in a diner. It goes back to the moment a dying alien chose a random kid because there was nobody else left to ask. Richard Rider is the proof that you don't need a destiny to be a legend. You just need to be the one who stays standing when everyone else has fallen. The Nova Force is still out there humming in the dark, waiting for the next crisis. And Richard is still there, the human rocket, burning bright against the void. But the question remains, what happens to the man when the fire finally consumes the vessel? There are secrets within the world mind that Richard still hasn't uncovered. There are crimes committed in the name of Xandar that the universe hasn't forgotten. The origin of Nova wasn't the end of a story, it was the beginning of a cosmic reckoning. If you enjoyed this story, tag a friend.